The first thing I usually do is I size my feathers so that they're the exact size I want to be on the fly. So I use a ruler, and I have a couple of spots marked here, and then I cut the feathers to length, and then they're ready to go. We're going to put a tail on the fly. The tail gives it a little bit of color, as well as primarily it helps hold the wings up. And I'm using bucktail, and in this case tan bucktail. So I get myself a clump, trim it off, and even the hairs up. Now that's ready to go. So I start with my thread. The thread color is really not too important until you get to the end of the fly. So I put my thread on to start it about halfway between the bend of the hook and the barb. And I build up a little space of hair there, or of thread, to put under the material so the material will stay better and not slide around. So then I take my bucktail, clean it out, make sure it's nice and even, lay it out there to get my size, trim it off, and tie it on. In order to help keep those feathers nice and straight on there, I pull it up real straight, like that, and then I flatten it out. So now the feathers will sort of lay on there. A very simple trick in order to get the feathers to stick when you start to tie them on is put a little bit of super glue on them, on the thread. And I put two together, get them matched up to the exact length, and you simply lay them on top. And if you use a real light touch on your thread and not pull on it real tight, they'll stay right there pretty much where you want them. The next thing I do is put on the grizzly. Even though the feathers look fragile, they actually are pretty strong, so you can move them around and they'll stay pretty much where you put them. So that's the wing. The next thing I do is I need some flash in it. And I have gotten away from a lot of the strong, bright flashes, and now I use Puglisi Anadromus brush. Put 2 wraps of it on there, sort of sweeping it back as I go. Because it has a stainless steel wire in it, I don't use my scissors for it. I use some pliers to cut it. Because the flash gets a little pressed in there, I take a bobbin and pick it out. So now I want to get the final spot where my head is going to be, so I advance my thread up to the front where I want my head to end. And I come back. All this time I'm building up the hook a little bit, the body. The next thing I want to do is put a little bit of marabou. I use this barred marabou. This marabou is very fragile and easy to break. So I tie it on sort of at an angle like this, and I wet it really good so it comes together into a sort of a solid mass, and it'll stay together, and then you can use your hackle pliers and it won't break so easily on you. So then I just wrap it like you're palmering any kind of feather, pulling it back so it makes sure that it doesn't overwrap itself. So I'm going to wrap back over it to push it back so it lays back on the fly. So then I come forward. Now I'm ready to put my collar on, and I'm using Finnish raccoon. Get a pretty good sized clump, leaving all the underfur in there. And then, because the raccoon seems to be different lengths, in packages, you kind of want to figure out how long you want it to be and lay on the fly. So the rest of this you just trim off and waste. And if you trim it off like that, nice and clean, you get a real clean head without a lot of the little tiny hairs sticking up all over the place. So you wrap this on, tie it down, and then you want to flatten it out a little bit and let it curve around the hook. So then you get another clump. Now you know about how long you're going to need it, so you don't need to measure it so much. I'm going to take out a couple of these really long hairs. Then you turn the fly upside down. And tie on the next clump. Okay, we've got the raccoon pretty much around the hook. Now you want to finish off the head. Okay, you see I put a lot of thread on the head, mostly to build it up. Since I use small thread, it's pretty small. Takes a lot of wraps. And then I'm going to put a head on so I can see it in the water. So I call it a buzz head, but it's primarily just to, so I can, like I said, so I can see it. I could use flat wax thread to build up the head, but since I already have 6/0 thread here and I'm using it, just with a few more wraps I get a body built up. I like tan heads, brown heads, but you need the bright color to be able to see it in the water. I finish it with super glue. With super glue, and then finish the head with 5-minute epoxy. That's it.